I'm Kevin Werbach, professor of legal studies and business ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies, from broadband to blockchain. Today, AI is promising to transform our world. But AI needs accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's developed and deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. Dr. Kelly Trindel is Chief Responsible AI Officer at Workday, the dominant provider of enterprise human resources software. In our conversation, we talk about how her background as a social scientist and a staff person at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission contribute to her work on AI governance. Where to start in creating an AI governance program in a company, how Workday approaches the thorny ethical and legal issues around AI in employment functions, and how to integrate responsible AI effectively into an organization. Kelly, welcome to the Road to Accountable AI.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
You got your degree, I understand, in psychology. So tell us a little bit how you got from there to doing work on AI governance.
Sure. Yeah, so my background is in experimental psychology, and I think that really helped prepare me for AI governance work because AI systems are really socio-technical systems. So there's this really important interaction and interdependence between people, humans, and machines, technology. And so I think my background as a social scientist really helps me understand the socio part of that. But it also keeps me grounded in the scientific method, as opposed to taking like a philosophical kind of approach to socio-technical. I'm able to take more of a scientific approach. So I actually use my background, my degree, my education all the time, which is nice.
What exactly does that mean, a scientific approach to AI ethics?
Sure. So I think if I was more of a philosopher, I'm not a philosopher, so I can just kind of guess what that would be like. It would be a little bit more about sort of the philosophy behind what makes human beings feel complete and whole and appreciated within the socio-technical realm of dealing with these machines. For me, I'm very interested in numbers and evidence. I base everything I do to the extent that I can on research, on scientific findings. Now, there's not a whole lot of research in this space yet, and I'm hoping that there will be more over time about how people feel about systems that they're interacting with, what makes, how can we build a relationship between people and AI systems where people actually, are improved by the interaction, where they have a better working relationship with AI systems. I look forward to more research in that area. But as much as I can, I make decisions based on research findings. So that's what I mean by having a scientific approach.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so a couple more things I want to ask you just about your background before getting to Workday. You spent time at the EEOC in government. So tell us about how that fits in dealing with employment discrimination issues from that perspective.
Sure. So at EEOC, I was a social science research analyst, and then eventually I took leadership of the team of social science research analysts. And what we did was we assisted investigative teams with systemic discrimination cases. So I spent a lot of time on, when companies are doing hiring or other employment decisions, when they use assessments or employment screens or selection devices. I spent a lot of time assisting investigative teams to see if there was statistical evidence of adverse impact. And so typically there will be something historically there would be something like an IQ test or a personality test or something. And we were looking to see, does the use of that test screen out disproportionately certain applicants? So over time, over the years that I was at EEOC, there were about 8 years I was there. Towards the end of my tenure, I started to hear about machine learning and AI being used in employment screening. And that's really where I started to study it and learn about it. I had some really great leaders and folks who were senior to me who, supported my interest in learning about this area and looking into it. And so that's where I got really interested in it. There wasn't a whole lot at that time that was sort of coming through EEOC, but I had a strong sense that it was going to turn into something. And so I was studying it quite a bit. And then, leadership at the commission started to get interested. And it really all culminated there was a hearing, I think it was in 2016, where we invited folks from outside the commission to come in and testify about, what this space was about, how it was growing, how these kind of screening devices, selection devices, how the use of AI for these purposes could be developed in a positive way. And that got me really excited. So that's how I got my start really in all of this.
Mm-hmm. And then you worked at Pymetrics, which was a really interesting startup that was actually trying to affirmatively take these fairness concerns into account in making employment decisions. So, can you say a little bit about how far we've come in terms of the capability of those techniques, both to identify the harmful biases and to actually use the machine learning in a positive way?
Sure. My time at Pymetrics was great. I think everybody who works in corporate America should have a stint at a startup. So I learned a lot while I was there. And so the question is, how far have we come? Well, I can really only speak to my experience in the space. And I think when I was at Pymetrics, I was able to focus on basically a couple of AI-driven assessments for hiring. Now I run an enterprise-wide program, which includes a lot different, very different kinds of AI that, Workday as a developer of AI technologies provides to our customers, deployers, as I refer to them. And so for me, for my journey, it's really been kind of starting very focused and opening that aperture up much more broadly to think about, okay, so AI is really not only about assessments, like traditional kind of personality assessments or IQ assessments, like I said before. AI and ML can be used in all kinds of different ways that are relevant specifically to, people at work. And so I don't think I'm directly answering your question, but that's really been my journey, that there's really so many very different uses, and they all need to be thought about in terms of, how are they benefiting people in the workplace?
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue to talking about what you're doing now at Workday, which is a large company in particularly the HR space. And as I understand, you were the first person in this role heading up responsible AI. So where do you start setting up a program like that in a major enterprise?
Yeah, so for me, I started with a really strong executive sponsor, and that's very important. Our chief legal officer has really been involved very closely from the beginning. And I was lucky that he came from Microsoft. He did this work at Microsoft before he joined Workday. So he really had a sense of it and the value of it, and that it was important work. So starting there, I really had a sponsor at the executive level, but also a thought partner, like a really smart person coming from a different perspective who I could talk about, it could look like this or it could look like that. We could take it in this direction or that direction. So for me, that was really formative and important. But beyond that, in terms of building the actual team, I basically took a look at my background and my expertise and what I could offer. And I thought about, what am I missing? That was my first thought, is again, I'm always looking for who can I bounce things off of, who's different from me, who has a different approach, who has a different perspective. And so I thought I could really use a data scientist. As I mentioned, I have the sort of statistician background. I know how to analyze data. I know how to think about things scientifically. But I'm not really a data scientist in the way that some other folks are. And I've moved into leadership and direction of work like that, as opposed to really having my hands in it. So my skills in terms of analyzing data have gotten, a little rusty. And so my first move was to bring on a really solid data scientist. And then there again, I had a partner to think about things together with. And she and I built everything from our new AI ethics principles to our risk evaluation to our approach to bias testing. And we built the entire team together. So that's really where I started, was the executive sponsor and my first hire, which was a data scientist.
And so this was what, like 4 or 5 years ago now?
Something like that. I lose track of the years. Something like
we all do. But I just trying to get a sense of like, how much at that point, did you feel like you had to build something from scratch, bespoke, versus okay, there's a playbook and maybe we'll vary it a little, but we know what all the pieces are.
It really did feel for me like starting from scratch. I should say that Workday has had AI ethics principles since I think 2019. So those were there. We did take another look at them and refresh them when we started this new program. So like I say, there was the sponsor in place. There were the principles in place. There are values for Workday in place for sure. But in terms of building the program, building the enterprise program, we started from the bottom. And I didn't feel like there was a very clear playbook that I could find. I think since then, there have certainly been things that have been put in place, like, there's the NIST AI risk management framework. There's an ISO standard now. There's the EU AI Act. There's, as you mentioned previously, there's lots of companies have programs in place now. So I think there's a lot of things to look at this point. But, 4 years ago or so, there wasn't a whole lot. Mm-hmm. So really what we did was we started from the company values and we looked at the actual technologies that we build and provide to customers, like the business. And we thought, okay, so what does that mean? Like, how do we take the company values and the commitments that have been already, sort of communicated and put in place? And how do we translate that into a framework and a program? And we did have early versions of like the EU AI Act and the NIST AI risk management framework. They were in development. So we had sort of drafts and early versions that we could look at. And we went from there. We started from there. So it's actually really affirming to see some of the other stuff that's come into practice in the years since, because I don't know if I've been lucky or I was looking at the right things or I just had the right support or what. But every time something comes up, I'm like, okay, we might have to make some changes, but we really have a solid core in place and we're generally aligned. And that's a really nice feeling.
Yeah, but how do you go from principles and values, which we can abstract, to making concrete decisions? We need, this kind of function and this kind of structure.
Sure. So I think a couple of really solid foundational programmatic elements for me have been, first of all, we said, and this might have been from looking at early versions of EU AI Act, for example. First of all, we said, look, not every AI technology that Workday builds should be considered the same. Some of them bring greater risk to fundamental human rights and safety, whereas others are less risky. And, we had those early versions of things that we could look at to direct us. But I also had my background, as you mentioned, like from the EEOC. So it was immediately obvious to me that if some technology that we provide to a customer could potentially limit workers' economic opportunities, that's riskier. So I was lucky to have that background to start thinking about it. And from there, I have a small team. I think it's 5 people who report to me right now. So that's pretty small for the size of Workday. So we started thinking right from the beginning about like, what can we build that's scalable, that we can use people from other departments to really put in place. So early on, it was like, okay, this is what we're thinking about risk tiering of the technologies we develop. And let's build something scalable that we can put in the hands of our product development teams so they can decide really fast. Is this a higher risk AI product or technology, or is it lower risk? And so that was what we built called our risk evaluation. And we tried to make it as quick and easy as possible. It's basically in the form of like a questionnaire, but it's adaptive based on, product developers, how they answer a question will lead them in a certain direction. So they usually don't have to answer more than 5 or 6 questions before they get to okay, here's the risk level of your technology, and these are the safeguards that you have to build in as you're developing it. So then, we worked with other folks around I'm in the legal compliance corporate affairs department, and we have a great product legal team, which sort of acts as frontline for us and works directly with those developers. And so they're there as an escalation point. What does it mean that you're asking this question, or what does it mean that we need to build this safeguard into the product or technology? So that's one example of, we look at the principles and the values, and at the core, we want to build things that have a positive impact, right? So number one, it's like, how do you take the resources that you have and figure out where to put your energy? And so it's like something like a scalable risk evaluation helps our product development team say, all right, we have to put a lot of time into this set of products and maybe less time into that set of products. So that's one example of the risk evaluation.
How would you get them, the product teams, to buy in? Presumably if they do the risk evaluation and the response is low risk, you don't do anything, that's fine. But, if they come up saying there's significant concerns, it's always the challenge that product teams want to ship product.
Yeah, totally. Product teams definitely want to ship product, but we also are aware, I think pretty much everybody here is acutely aware, that customers want to buy products that they can use, that they can feel good about, that they're not overly concerned about, the risks related to those. So, I have not come upon a product team at Workday who has said, I don't care. I'm not interested. I don't want to do that. What I've come upon, actually, if any challenge, has been the opposite. It's been like, God, I'm really worried about this. I'd really like to develop this product. I'd really like to sell this product, but I kind of think it's too scary. It's too risky. I don't want to get involved. And so really what, my function has turned into is like it's okay. We can do this. These are the kind of things you have to think about as you're working through this. And there's all kinds of people here to help. Even though, I'm one person and my team is small, a lot of my work has actually been enabling other folks to assist with this kind of work. So as I mentioned, we've got frontline teams in place who are really well enabled and educated in this space, and they bring some of their own expertise to the space as well. But then we've also got this function called a Champions Network, Responsible AI Champions Network at Workday. And the demand for participation in that program has been overwhelming, actually, so much so that we hired a person to run the Responsible AI Champions Network.
What exactly is a champion, and what do they do?
Yeah, so they do a few different things. Like, since we've actually brought someone on to organize and facilitate, this person has really done a great job of coming up with the concept of tiering of champions. So there are some champions who really just want to be educated. They really are just interested and they want to know. They might be folks like even in our sales department or in our customer success department. They want to be educated so they can communicate effectively, maybe with external folks, customers, etc. So that's one tier of champions. And the tiers go all the way to like our engineers who are deep in the weeds of building, platform on which the products and technologies sit. And they're thinking about, okay, so from an engineering perspective, what can I do? What does it mean? Like, how can I partner? So that's really more of like a partnership tier of the Champions Network, where we learn as much from them as they learn from us. Because really, you asked earlier where I started, and the journey has really been from the products, like product and technology, to now we're getting a little deeper into the platform and sort of the engineering that all these products and technologies sit on top of. And so as we get more and more folks interested in the Champions Network at that partnership level, we're teaching them about everything we do at the product level. They're teaching us about, limitations isn't the right word, but factors to think about. Like you might say, for example, we call it a protocol for higher risk AI technologies, that there should be like a location exclusion built into the product. That's one of the things that we say for higher risk AI technologies. And that doesn't really come from any, particular law or regulation or best practice framework even. It's just that when we provide technologies to our customers, they might want to only use them in certain places. Like it's just a
Mm-hmm.
practical consideration. Whereas they might say, I don't want to use this in this state, city, country, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So as we get closer to working with our engineering and platform colleagues, they might say, that's totally understandable, and I understand why you want to do that. It poses these challenges for us at the platform level. Like we need to know about that. We need to help you. We need to work together. So it's kind of like this champions network. There's demand for it. There's also all kinds of opportunity in it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's been a really great direction to take the program in.
Yeah, and that example you gave leads to the next thing I was going to ask, which is, what's distinctive about, the program that you have at Workday, either because of the industry and space the company is, or just the company's values and distinctive nature.
Let's see, what's distinct about us as compared to other companies that have programs? That's what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I sort of have as a goal for myself in the next couple of quarters is to reconnect with a lot of folks that are working in other companies doing this kind of work. Because as I said, there weren't a whole lot, at least that I was aware of early on. And so I made contact with a few folks early on just to see what they're doing and what they're thinking and how they're approaching it. And then I got really deep into what Workday does. And so it's hard for me to even compare what we do to other companies because I've gotten a little bit disconnected from what other companies are doing. So ask me that again in 6 months and I'll have
No problem. But I guess I would assume, given that it's the nature of the company, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with employment relationships, and obviously there's a lot of law in those situations, a lot of familiar challenges, whether it's about bias or other mistreatment of people or what information you can use and so forth.
Yeah.
Does that change, just how you develop a program?
Oh yeah, for sure. So everything depends on the business, right? I guess I was touching on this a little bit earlier when we talked about taking like a scientific approach. I know a scientific approach is not the same as like a business approach, but I'm intermingling them because I'm trying to build a program that's based in science within a business. And so just like I would have approached like a research study, it's kind of like, what is it that I'm trying to figure out? What are the factors that I need to consider to figure this out? And this is all within the context of Workday's business. And so, yeah, if I was at a place like, I mentioned Microsoft earlier, or I know Salesforce has a really great program. If I was at a business that sold different products, that had a different business, then the program would look different. Like that risk evaluation I mentioned earlier, a lot of it is focused on, does this product have the potential to limit workers' economic opportunities? That's sort of like number one consideration for higher risk AI at Workday. And it would be a different consideration if the business was different.
Right.
So, yeah, I think my background is probably uniquely suited for Workday's business because I have that EEOC experience, and all that kind of background. What I've learned a little bit, actually more from customers than sort of others in comparable businesses, is that often our customers, like some of their responsible AI programs are situated within their like OCHRO function, which is really interesting. So that sort of tells me that there are definitely other companies out there that do a lot of work, in different kind of business areas, but they're also thinking about the HR functions as sort of being the place where they want to spend more time thinking about risk of deploying AI products.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you. You talked about that your executive sponsor is the chief legal officer, and you're within that group. Is there a danger that if responsible AI sits there, that it starts to sound too much like pure compliance and pure dealing with law and regulation as opposed to some of the broader issues?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's one that I've been thinking about from the beginning and talking about with my executive sponsors from the beginning as well. One of the ways that we've pushed against that is that we also have what we call a responsible AI advisory board. And so the chief legal officer, Rich Sauer, is the chair of that board. I function like the sort of secretary of the board, like bringing together, like the corporate secretary, bringing together the folks who need to be there, organizing the agenda, like driving the agenda, driving the meetings, all of that kind of thing. And that includes folks like our chief product officer, our chief technology officer, our chief diversity officer. So they come from outside of legal and compliance. I'm not an attorney, even though I have the EEOC background. My thinking is definitely not limited to compliance. Compliance is important. And we want to definitely take into account the laws and the regulations and complying not only with them, but also with Workday policy. Like you asked a question earlier, like how do you get the product teams to comply with this risk evaluation? It's Workday policy to comply with the risk evaluation.
Yeah.
So that's a way to think about compliance as well. But I mean, really, I want to foster an ecosystem of, trust. I want our customers to trust our technology. And so, sometimes I'll hear others talk about like a culture of compliance, and I kind of have a flinch reaction to that. Like, I don't want to foster a culture of compliance. I want to foster a culture of trust. Both among what we call our workmates, which are people who work at Workday. Like, I want our workmates to trust that the technologies we're building are in alignment with our values and our principles. And I want our customers to trust that the technologies that we're building are in such alignment as well. So it's a great question, and it's something I think about a lot. And I think, if we had decided to go the alternate route, it's either within the sort of legal and compliance realm, or it's more within the product and technology realm. If we had gone that product and technology realm and put the program over there, obviously the risk that we might have would be, like you said earlier, product teams want to ship product. And so there's a little bit of kind of, I don't know what the word is, like almost like protection of like, we have to maintain this. It's important by situating us within the legal and compliance department. It also gives me direct line of sight to our board, our Workday board of directors, where I go and report at least annually about what the program is and how we're doing, so that I don't foresee any risk to the program. But if there was ever any risk, I could go straight to the board and say, I don't want this to happen, and these are the reasons why it shouldn't happen. So that's a really good thing to have.
Yep. What are the kinds of things that you talk about in that advisory board?
Yeah, so the advisory board from the beginning, so that's the one it's internal. So it has our chief product officer, chief technology officer, et cetera. From the beginning, we went to them and said, okay, so we want to update our AI ethics principles. This is why, this is what we're thinking. And we really asked for approval, basically. First, they were like an approval mechanism for the kinds of things we wanted to build. Then over time, as we got our feet on the ground and we got people in seat, and we started to educate the business about why we're here and what we're doing and why we're important, the board became less, our advisory board became less of an approval mechanism and more of like a guidance mechanism. And I'm trying to find really the right mechanism now. Like for a long time, we met monthly. We talked about everything. They approved everything. Now, as we're going forward, we find that we need to meet less often because, we need their approval less on things. And I'm trying to find the right cadence and the right role for them at this point, because it's very important that we stay connected. And so, recently the conversation has been about, okay, so Workday is really moving in a direction of agentic AI. We want to build agentic AI, right? Agents. And so, most recently the conversation has been, what does that mean for our, number one AI ethics principle at Workday is amplify human potential. So as we build agents that can act more autonomously, what does it mean for that principle and for our associated governance? We decided it's not like we're throwing away that principle. We're not throwing away associated human in the loop governance. We probably need to be more clear about the risk leveling of human involvement. So, this is really behind the scenes discussion. It's sort of been, so for those lower risk AI technologies, there's lower risk associated with automation. if you're talking about things that could actually impact workers' economic opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to automate those decisions. And so it's really been that discussion of what needs to shift, what needs to stay the same, how do we communicate it both internally and externally, and how do we get that kind of support, guidance, strategic advice from that advisory board.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're sort of in the middle of there's a set of issues that all companies have to deal with in terms of AI and workers with things like bias and economic opportunity for the impact of the tools. And then there was also this broader conversation about the impact of AI on jobs and the workplace and the economy more generally. And it sounds like you're, just given the nature of Workday's business, you're really kind of in the middle of both.
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time to be doing this work. Honestly, I'd be bored if I just built the program and it just stayed the same and I was just running it.
Yeah.
So I really, it's great to have a new challenge and to have really thoughtful people who want to put their heads together and figure out, how do we do this? How do we do this in a way that, protects people and is aligned with our principles and our values, but also doesn't stunt the business? I think sort of being in the middle of that is what I find really energizing and interesting. I haven't seen a problem yet that is not solvable. There's always, it takes a minute. You have to think, you have to talk to people who are thinking differently, who have different goals. Like you said, ship product is one goal, govern technology is another goal. And when you get your heads together and you really think about, how do we meet both goals? How do we do this together? That is energizing. I find that interesting. So I'm happy to be at the center of, a lot of this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. What else are you focused on right now going forward? What are the biggest challenges that you still see ahead of you?
That's a great question. Well, one of the ones you touched on already that's been really interesting for me has been the whole legal aspect of the work. Like I said, I'm not an attorney. No one on the team that I had hired up until recently was an attorney. We're all, versions of scientists and, DevOps kind of experts and enablement experts, folks like that. Recently, when the EU AI Act came, into force, and we're really on deadlines to assure that our governance program is aligned with these requirements, we brought an attorney onto the team for the first time. And so this is actually my first experience, managing an attorney, having an attorney on the team. And so, sort of thinking about, it's like you asked about earlier, like I don't want this to be purely compliance, legal and compliance. I want this to be a well-rounded program that includes both, just what's right, what's best, what's founded in research, and then how all of that is aligned with legal. And so I think we're really, headed in a great direction. I think, we have a great team in place. And so I think being situated within a large legal and compliance department, having one attorney on the team has been an interesting, interaction. So, some of it is, this might sound boring to your listeners, but maybe not. Some of it is like actual roles and responsibilities. Like, what is our role in determining if something is legally compliant? What, do we, sort of agree is someone else's role to sort of, do we build this thing in a way that we oversee, like we govern technology, and then sort of attorneys from outside the team oversee what we're doing? Like, is that the framework? There's a lot to figure out as we go forward, and more of these laws and regulations come into effect. EU won't be the last one. It's a big one, but in some certain ways, it's not even really the most sort of stringent. Like, if you look at a lot of the stuff around bias and discrimination, I would say what we have in the US is a little bit more stringent than what's in EU. But then EU has all these other things that we need to think about and take into account. So honestly, if, day to day, what's on my mind, a lot of it is that, how do I steer this ship in a way that takes into account those kind of laws and regulations, but doesn't get completely subsumed under that heading, and continues to enable the business and continues to stay aligned with the business. That'll probably be attention is the only word I can think of, probably forever, probably as long as I'm in this work. So that's interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's part of what fascinates me about this whole area of AI governance and accountability. It keeps changing, and even the organizations that have been building these programs and working in this area for a while, they are constantly having to ask themselves the same questions.
Yeah.
And the world keeps changing, and the technology keeps changing.
Yeah.
So we need to wrap up, but Kelly, it's really been a pleasure speaking with you.
You too. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a great time. Thank you.
This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening. This is Kevin Werbach. If you want to go deeper on AI governance, trust, and responsibility with me and other distinguished faculty of the world's top business school, sign up for the next cohort of Wharton's Strategies for Accountable AI online executive education program, featuring live interaction with faculty, expert interviews, and custom-designed asynchronous content. Join fellow business leaders to learn valuable skills you can put to work in your organization. Visit execed.wharton.upenn.edu/ACAI for full details. I hope to see you there.